Gotta coach better, gotta play better. Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall. You can follow me on Twitter if you're still on that stupid app Braden Gall.
Mine's Erin Dugan. You can follow me on Twitter at the Erin Dugan or Instagram Erin_Dugan.
Really big show. Fun show planned today. Lots of news considering it's the middle of freaking June. Number one, Kyle Tucker from The Athletic, covering all things Kentucky athletics. We even ask about the athletic director and the basketball coach during the football State of the Union.
Wow.
For
Can't
the
hold
Kentucky
us
Wildcats.
back.
It's all lumped together, though, up there in Lexington, man. It's all lumped together. So we're going to talk with Kyle Tucker a little bit later on in our Kentucky State of the Union, which means we only have one State of the Union left.
Which is? I already know it.
It'll be the Vanderbilt Commodores, and the only reason it happened last is because
even do this.
No. Because our guest who's going to come on is also a college baseball expert who will give us a College World Series recap as well. It was planned strategically, Erin.
Braden's trying to make it nicer to say Vanderbilt went last and blaming it on the College World Series, but really he put them where they're ranked in the SEC.
Also, that's also true, but not that they're ranked last in the SEC.
But you didn't do it because of that.
No,
it was correlated, but not causal. That's today's lesson. Look it up.
Okay, sounds good. So the 2024 schedules came out like last Wednesday. I wasn't really excited about them. We didn't talk about them much on the episode last week, and then they came on the show, like the TV show started, and I was like, oh, this is pretty fucking cool. So I got into it. We'll give you some of our thoughts on that. They've been covered a lot over the last week, so we'll just give you some of our quick thoughts. Two headlines here, one about Nick Saban and one important headline that fans need to know about the Florida Gators. So we'll get into that, all of that today on the show. But the main topic, trap games. And Erin already has a problem with the word trap games as a concept. So we're going to discuss what that means. And then we're going to go through every team in the SEC, and we're going to tell you, watch out for those trap games in 2023. This
Shocking.
Week on the show.
Erin already has a problem 90 seconds into the show. Can't say we're surprised.
It's very normal. It's very standard.
Yep.
Par for the course. It's on brand, etc., etc., etc.
Nothing if not consistent.
Rate, review, and subscribe. Check out the YouTube page. So a lot of you new folks who are hanging out with us on the YouTube page, we do appreciate you guys. So share the show.
Holy moly.
I think I did that last week too.
I also haven't said holy moly instead of holy shit in years until then.
Well, you're getting older. It happens. At least it's not like Jeepers Creepers or something like that. That'd be bad. That would not be a good one. Okay. So share the show.
No.
Tell everybody about the product.
No.
Trap games. Kentucky State of the Union with Kyle Tucker. 2024 schedules and some news and notes here. Quickly, Nick Saban complaining. I think he did an interview with Joel Klatt on a podcast with Fox Sports about how his team should have made the playoff last year. I don't think we agree with that. I don't agree with all the Twitter backlash that has taken place this week because everyone is screaming and yelling about how stupid Nick Saban is. I think if you take 1 second to think about it, you could argue that Alabama was a better football team than TCU, was a better football team than Michigan, maybe. Maybe they were better than Ohio State. His rationale, his argument is, I found out that, we'd be favored over 3 of those teams in the playoff, and maybe they didn't put us in. And I don't know. I think this is just Saban kind of being Saban here. He's always posturing. He's always campaigning. I didn't really get that upset about it. I think people got way too worked up about his comments. Alabama was pretty good last year. They would have gotten into a 12-team playoff.
Sorry, Caroline and Braden. People are being loud as shit, and I had to mute you. So hold on.
Not the first time in my life. I actually didn't record any of that on my end.
Oh, you didn't? I have it all.
I got it.
You are hearing me through here, right?
Yep.
Okay. Can you tee me back up for exactly what you just said? Because they're being loud.
It's all the Saban stuff. In fact, here's what I'm gonna do. It's all the Saban stuff. Like Saban said, his team should have gotten in because he would have been favored in the thing, and blah 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 blah. people then Danny Cannell and some other people got in on top of it and said, I can't believe this guy doesn't understand. His team lost 2 games. And Saban was saying, well, it shouldn't just be teams that were 1 loss. It's got to be more nuanced than that. And he's basically just complaining. And I just said, look, he's Saban, he's campaigning, he's posturing, he's trying to make a case. But as we're going to a 12-team playoff in the future, I'm not sure it's going to matter.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we'll just pick up there. Her computer's not on Do Not Disturb, but I can't get it there, and I just got to go. So she'll have to just whatever. Okay. So you want me to pick up?
Tell me when you're ready.
You go.
I did all the build up again 2 times.
I thought you were saying that you were going to count down.
I'm going to count you in.
Okay. I don't think it's any shock that Nick Saban is always just campaigning to make sure his program is in the best possible position. And I do think that, a lot of times that is understandable because where they are, they do get harder. I mean, I understand where he's coming from a lot of the time because they do end up with some of the harder like rivalries and situations and compared to other schools, but he's always going to campaign for his school and try to advocate no matter how good they are or if they're having an off year, which is all relative to Alabama. But that's what Nick Saban does, and that's part of what makes him a good coach. If he didn't do that, you'd be probably questioning him also.
And if you go listen to the entire interview, which of course no one does before they jump on Twitter and spew venom, is that it's really a lot more about like we have to be sort of flexible in our scheduling. We have to be able to adapt. We've got to create balance across the sport, which is very hard to do right now. Like he goes into these really long. It's a long conversation. It's not just you can't boil it all down to Saban believes he should have made the playoff last year.
And
like
I think
it's
go ahead.
It's just more complicated than that. That's all.
It is, and I think that when you're trying to achieve balance and you're one of the best teams in the conference, that means that you're trying to achieve balance for a team like Vanderbilt or someone who's sat at the bottom of the conference is going to mean that you're given more favorable games that you could potentially win to make things closer. When you're sitting at the top of the conference, isn't the opposite happening a lot of the time?
Yeah. I mean, he goes on to say basically like everybody wants to create parity, but it's like really hard to do. I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
The money is different. The dynamics are different at every different school. The investment in the athletes and the programs are different. Value is created for each athlete differently. And then he also talked about how like, well, they should have contracts. Athletes should have contracts. Like, and that part I don't like. Coaches have contracts, but they also break them a lot. But there's a buyout. There's a financial reason why you can't get out of the contract. And I think the NIL response to that is actually pretty nice. Like you can sign with this team. You could sign with Ole Miss. But the only way you make this money is if you do appearances at this bookstore in Oxford. And you can't, if you transfer to Athens, you're not going to be able to do appearances at the bookstore. And therefore you sacrifice the money, which is sort of like a buyout for a coach's contract. So I think it's more equitable than Saban's letting on. But either way, it got all blown out of proportion on Twitter as usual.
Shocking.
So, yeah. All right. Before we get to 2024 schedules, trap games, and Kyle Tucker, quickly, I wanted to make this note to be positive on the show, Aaron. I think it's always good to be positive. What is the biggest concern and issue with the Florida Gators under Dan Mullen and like moving forward? Like, what would you say fans were most upset about with Dan Mullen? This is an easy question.
Yeah, this feels like a trap.
Recruiting.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think there's recruiting, and then I think once you get past that, like unity as a team and culture.
I knew your brain would go too complicated. It's like no,
culture's not that complicated.
No. I know, but you always go to like the nebulous, vague, like hard to define, hard to build thing where it's like the average.
Okay, well, you gotta recruit kids, and then they have to like you to stay.
That's
Sorry,
true.
I'll say it in layman's terms.
But the roster is in worse shape than it's been in a long time because they did not recruit under Dan Mullen. So, in light of that, 8 total commitments for the Florida Gators this week. They have now the number 3 rated recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports. They've landed 3 top 100 players, 5 5-stars. They have the number 3 quarterback in America committed already. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they have 16 total commits. It doesn't mean this is where they're going to end in December. It doesn't mean this is where they're going to end in February. it doesn't mean that Billy Napier solved all the problems. But if you're going to get a W, you got to celebrate the W's. And Florida right now racking up W's on the recruiting trail right now, at least. So there you go.
I haven't gotten a chance to look and see where all of those recruits are coming from. Do you have any idea how many of them are coming from inside the state of Florida?
I can probably get to that.
Okay. That
fairly
is
quickly.
a question. Yeah, I'll vamp for a second. I think that is, I guess I have questions and comments. I know that Billy Napier's been able to do a lot inside the program, like they're doing facilities updates. He's fixing the culture. He is trying to build a staff around him that is, that has a home there. That's not just like a jumping off point. That feels like a solid culture, and that trickles down. That's why the coaching staff's important. Trickles down to the players. Yada yada yada. So I guess I'm curious not only about what you're looking up right now, but also what you think is making it work.
DJ Lagway is the number 1 quarterback, or their quarterback, the 5-star, the number 3 rated quarterback in the country. He's from Texas.
I'm asking why people are coming there. Are you saying people are following the talent, or?
Well, so the guys they just landed, like all this bunch of guys that they just landed. Right. A 4-star out of Mississippi, a 4-star out of Maryland, a 4-star out of Georgia, 4-star out of North Carolina, 4-star out of Georgia, 4-star out of Florida, and actually that was back in May. So basically, all these commitments are they're in the region. Like another one out of Georgia, another one out of Georgia. So they've gone into Georgia. They got one out of Maryland this last week, a 3-star. So it is actually, strangely enough, none from the state of Florida. They have a couple of kids committed from Florida, but not this most recent run. But it's North Carolina, it's Georgia mostly, and Mississippi, which are all pretty close.
Right.
But no, that's a very interesting point, and I did not notice that they are not one of those guys is from the state of Florida.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't really remember exactly what was going on with the in-state recruiting base with Dan Mullen and how that fluctuated, but I need to look at that too. Maybe we can talk about it more next week when I've had a chance to dive in. But I think that's really interesting of just as these new coaches are coming in, what's happening with the in-state recruiting and how is that shifting? And, we can dive in further later. Yeah. I was just curious if you knew off the top of your head, like what was happening. And it sounds like a lot of them are coming from out of state, even as far north as Maryland. So,
Well, so that 6 of their 16 total commitments are from Georgia, which is, I mean, right now, Georgia has to be a main supplier of talent to basically every team in the Southeast. Like Georgia has to be, it's got to be like your home state and then Georgia.
Yeah.
Or like your home state and then Georgia and Florida. Your home state, Texas, and Georgia. You know what I mean? Like it has to be Texas, Georgia, Florida, some combination of those 3, depending on where you're at, right? If Texas or A&M or Oklahoma, they need to be using Texas. If it's Florida, South Carolina.
Oh,
if it's Florida, South Carolina, Auburn, or Georgia, like they need to go into Florida. So that'll be interesting to see what they do in the state. To your first question, like why is it working? I do think that Napier is a very That's the right word. He's taking an extremely holistic approach to building a program. So he's building out like infrastructure, and he's building out personnel departments, and he's building out just actual facilities, and like he's just building it all out to become this big machine.
Yep.
And I think that's what we're seeing is it's starting to pay off.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to point that out. Good Georgia stuff. Yeah. I mean, good Florida stuff.
Good Florida stuff. You got it.
I'm terrible.
No, that answered my question. I think just moving in the right direction and doing it at a pace that makes sense, and it's not. Yeah. Honestly, it hasn't taken long. I mean, if this is starting to work this year, that's a plenty quick turnaround for a new coaching staff.
It's definitely something that they need. They need to finish. If they finish top 5 in recruiting, we have a very different conversation. They finished 6-6 and finished top 5 in recruiting. We're having a very different conversation about Billy Napier going into year 3 if they were 6-6 and finished 18th in recruiting. Mm-hmm. I know that sounds stupid, but like it would be very different. It'd be a very different conversation.
It would be.
All right, 2024 schedules. It was all. Were you excited? Did you even know this was happening? Like I knew it was happening. I wasn't really that excited about it. And then the show came on SEC Network at 6:00, and I was like, "Honey, get the kids out of here. I gotta sit down and take notes." And
I did know, but it still snuck up on me.
I was like genuinely excited. But not until like the moment it happened. I was like, "Oh my God, who's Texas going to play in the SEC? And I was like so fired up about it.
No, there's a lot of other things going on. And then when it was just a pleasant surprise when it finally happened. So
yeah, kind of.
I'm glad your wife was able to get your kids out of the room so you could watch it.
They had porch time, as we call it. Texas will play Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Mississippi State at home. So obviously Florida and Georgia, two big ones there. They're going to play at A&M, which is by far the most important game of the entire new arrangement. Texas at Texas A&M. I was there. I believe it was the last ever Southwest Conference matchup in Austin, Texas, before the Big 12, and it was like a 51-15 Texas rout of the Aggies.
Like the last time they played?
No, this was like in the 90s.
Oh,
this was like before they went to the Big 12. But that's the last I was there. My last year would have been 8th grade in Austin. And I just remember I've been to 3 Texas A&M games, and they're just so incredible. And thinking about like the television buildup and the crowds around College Station and the energy, and like game day is going to be there, and it's going to be just like, it is going to be batshit crazy.
What's the date?
They haven't given out this is just the opponents. They haven't
just
given
the
out
opponents.
the date.
They wouldn't have the dates yet. Yeah.
And again, remember, this is all 2024. So.
No, I know, but man, yeah, my calendar's going to get blocked off quick. I would love to go to that game.
Oh, it's so incredible. It's so incredible. Texas will also play at Arkansas.
Are we just talking about? Are you going in an order here? Or are we just talking about what we're excited about? Are you going through certain?
I was just giving
first?
you Texas. I was going to give Texas and Oklahoma, just the 2 new ones.
Okay.
Then they'll play at Vanderbilt as well. Oklahoma will host Alabama, which is incredible.
Yep.
They're going to host Tennessee, and oh, by the way, former Oklahoma quarterback Josh Heupel. They're going to host South Carolina. They will go to, think about these games: Oklahoma at LSU. Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Oklahoma at Auburn is awesome. Oklahoma,
and then they play at Mizzou.
They play at Mizzou and in the Grove against Ole Miss. Just
man, that's
awesome.
Even with all of the discussions we've had, I haven't actually until this very moment pictured Oklahoma in Oxford.
Isn't that gonna be great?
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Yep. Talk about very fun, very enthusiastic fan bases that can kind of just hold their own no matter what happens.
Dude, so Oklahoma, because every team plays either Oklahoma or Texas, every team in the SEC. But like the big games, you get Bama, Tennessee, LSU, Auburn. Those are 4 big brands in the SEC playing Oklahoma. Then you get Florida, Georgia, Texas A&M, and I guess Arkansas, which I guess is a big brand, playing against Texas. But it's a really important game for Texas and Arkansas historically. But here's what's interesting to me about all this, and this kind of will lead me into my first point about the new schedules and just how different they are from a divisional standpoint. So South Carolina is not going to play Tennessee, Florida, or Georgia.
Yeah,
they have played Tennessee, Florida, Georgia every single year of their entire SEC lives.
Yeah, it dates like when is
92.
Yeah.
And they
Georgia,
played,
South Carolina thing's weird.
And so's Tennessee, so's Florida, South Carolina. They're not, but they're going to play LSU, Ole Miss, Bama, A&M, and Oklahoma. It's just so weird.
It is. Just like getting used to it again. And
yes.
How do you feel like how are people taking this overall? You live, again, we talk about this a lot. Braden lives much more in the Twitter gutters than I do. So how do you feel like the overarching reaction is? Or people like excited enough about some things that they can lay off about others? Or
I don't know. I don't live in the sewers as much anymore. I'm taking some mental health. I'm trying to break up with my phone and my addiction with my phone. But I think Bama, Georgia, and Oklahoma probably have the 3 hardest, but like they're also the 3 most successful brands. So like I don't know why. Like I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an Arkansas fan, you love the setup because you're going to play all your old rivals. You know, you're playing a bunch of teams that you have rivalries with in Ole Miss and
LSU, Missouri.
Yeah, like you're playing like a lot of your rivals. Texas A&M is going to get Texas and LSU at home. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
And they don't play Georgia or Bama. So if you're an A&M fan, you're probably like that. Georgia at Alabama is tremendous. Just that. Thank you for that game. Thank you for giving us Georgia and Alabama.
Yeah, like don't have to wait to the postseason for that. Yeah.
Right. They have only played 4 times in the regular season, like in the last 20 years. They played a bunch in the postseason, to your point. But again, the newness of the schedules is what I find to be the most interesting. So, for example, Texas and Kentucky have played one time ever. That is a conference game next year.
Wow.
Texas and Mississippi State have played 4 times ever. That is a conference game next year. How about this? Vanderbilt and Texas have actually played 10 times.
Really? When?
The last one was 1928.
Oh, the last one was 1928?
Yeah, yep.
That was like, just a little bit after Tennessee helped Texas become a state.
Well done. South
I guess
Carolina.
a good bit after that, but
South Carolina is going to play at Oklahoma in an SEC game. They have never played a football game.
see, that to me, I feel like could develop into something really
That's
cool.
wild.
I don't know why those two make sense to me, but that could be really fun.
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why you're
No, I like it because I just feel like, I don't know. I guess I kind of picture them being in that, Oklahoma's had some insane years of football and has been really, really close to the top, but also kind of has, fallen back and sat in a little bit of a lower category. And I feel like those two are kind of on, if they were both on the up and up, it'd be really freaking cool.
Oklahoma has played Alabama 6 times total. Everybody knows the one that happened 23 years ago, but they've only played 6 times total. Now it's an SEC game. They've only played Tennessee 4 times total. We all remember the Baker Mayfield game in overtime in Knoxville, but they've only played 4 times total ever. Now it's an SEC game. 0 times Oklahoma's played South Carolina. 3 times they've played LSU. One of those was in the playoff. One of those was in the BCS national title game. And then they played 1 time out before that in 1948 or some shit. Oklahoma and Auburn. Think about that game. Oklahoma at Auburn. Great football game. That sounds like such good, awesome Saturday. 2 times ever in the history of the sport have they played. And now it's a conference game. Ole Miss, they've only played 1 time ever. That was 1999, Oklahoma and Ole Miss. So to me, it's just the number one biggest takeaway is to appreciate the new, appreciate the new norms and sort of the bizarro 2024 scheduling, because it all could be shifted and changed again in 2025.
And honestly, there's enough time to talk about things in television that it probably will. But we'll get to see what works and what people really latch on to and what makes sense. And then they will change it all because of dollars.
I don't know if there's any other games. Vanderbilt got an absolutely absurdly difficult draw. It's just no.
Is it just because no one cares about? I gotta say us right here because it just hurts. It's just because no one cares about us anymore. Is that where we are?
I live in Nashville. I know a lot of people that care. But I think on a national stage,
fans that care. You don't know people that are doing the scheduling that do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Clark Lee, God bless you. You're going to play Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, Kentucky, South Carolina, Missouri.
Vanderbilt, we did something bad in a past life.
I guess enjoy the next 2 seasons of Clark Lee. I don't know. That's a fireable contract, fireable schedule is what that is. So
yeah, yes, I don't have any follow-up response to that. It is a fireable schedule, no doubt.
I don't like that we didn't get LSU Texas, but I'm okay with that. They're getting a lot of we're getting Georgia and Florida at Texas. That's pretty cool, and we're getting Texas at A&M. The Georgia was scheduled to play at Texas A&M, and now they are not, which means Georgia still has yet to play a game in College Station as an SEC member of with A&M as an SEC team. It's never happened.
Yep.
They joined in 2012.
It would really, really be nice to see Bobby Petrino and Kirby Smart in that matchup. But
from your mouth to his ears, man.
But we didn't get it because we can't always get what we want.
Thank you, Keith and Mick. All right. Well, I just wanted anything else you want to add on the new scheduling? I know it's been out for a week, so people have kind of digested it, but I thought we kind of have to talk about it. So.
Yep. I think we definitely covered it. I'm ready to do trap games. I feel like this conversation is. I'm very excited for a lot of these. I do think we missed a few. I don't think it's detrimental what we missed, and I think it's all going to change in a year. So yeah, I'm all set.
And remember, it's not the permanent rivalries yet. So for now, you get Florida LSU, Florida Tennessee, Georgia Tennessee, LSU Ole Miss, and Bama LSU. Those all were maintained in 2024. all of those right now are not scheduled necessarily to be on the permanent schedule when they actually go to 9 games potentially. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, we got Kyle Tucker going to give us a Kentucky State of the Union, but let's dive into some trap games here in 2023. So when we sat down to prep the show, as you want to do, you and I kind of like had a moment where we said, well, what exactly is a trap game? And you kind of looked at me and you said, I think some people are using it in different
ways. That's
so
right.
I want to know, first of all, how do you define it? And then I'll give you what I think. But I want to hear what you say first.
Well, I think what initially a trap game was supposed to mean was it's something that's easily overlooked because maybe it came after a larger rivalry or must-win game, and then you kind of oversighted it because you're coming off of something that you really thought mattered or determined eligibility in the postseason or is a long-term rival, or you blew it with last season and it hurts too bad and all that. I do think that like now sometimes going through, because I mean, I'll look at and see what other people are saying just so we can respond to it and be like, so and so said this, or people are saying this, and that's not really accurate. So we can kind of like, we try to like debunk things that are spreading around, again, the Twitter sewer. And I think people are using this. Sometimes it's just like an upset, and it's not the same thing. It's not supposed to be.
Okay, so
but it is an upset. Okay, it's like it's like one is like a square is a rectangle, but not all rectangles are squares.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is like all upsets are trap games, but not all trap games are upsets.
All losses in trap games are upsets, but not all upsets are trap games.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So like
I think so, yeah.
The very first game of the season, if South Carolina came out and beat Georgia, that would be an upset. But unless it came after Alabama and Georgia blew it only because they were focused on Alabama and then lost to South Carolina, that would be a trap game.
Yeah, right? I think you're right. I think so it's like all games in which you are favored and you lose are upsets, but not all of those are trap games.
Right.
Okay. I think so I'm with you. So your definition is sort of how I view it as well. A trap game is like a team that you overlook to some degree, or that you assume. Like, this is why some of these teams, it's really hard to do this exercise. Like, we've talked a lot about how strong the middle class is in this conference. Mm-hmm. You look at Arkansas, for example. Like, look at Arkansas as a schedule. Now we're going to get to them like number 2 here, so we can get to them if we want to just start with Arkansas. If you look at Arkansas's schedule, like, they're not an elite enough team or a bad enough team to really have like glaring upset alert kind of situations. And like, I could look at a lot of these games, and like what I wrote down was Missouri at the end of the season, in the final week of the season, at home, because they will probably be favored in that game, and it's at home, which means they might even though they play them every year in crossover, like maybe they're 9-2 or 8-3, and they've had a really good year, and they just think they're going to waltz into the final game of the season and beat what could be a kind of sneaky good Missouri team. Like, I didn't have a lot of trap games on Arkansas's schedule, because they're the trap game for everybody else.
That's what I'm saying. I think that middle tier makes it really hard to define the trap games, because it's not for all the reasons you just said. But I also think it's not only right when it comes off a larger rivalry. God, that word is so hard.
I love
rivalry game. It never gets better for me. It's one of those things I can't improve on. It's not necessarily just when it comes after those. It's also like, did you count all the W's on your schedule and you're like, oh yeah, we can get to 6 in bowl eligibility, but then is Missouri going to keep you out? Their very last game of the season. If some of those middle tier games don't fall your way, and you're all of a sudden sitting 5-7, and you kind of like, oh yeah, we're bowl eligible team. Well, you still got Missouri, and no, you're not, because they could be defining or game changing in some way for your postseason play.
Like the only other one. So here's an example on Arkansas' schedule. They play Western Carolina, Kent State, and BYU before they play at LSU and Texas A&M and Ole Miss and Alabama. 4 huge, critical rivalry games, especially the first 2, LSU and A&M. Huge rivalry games. Mm-hmm. BYU at home, to me, is a trap game, if you believe that BYU is good enough to challenge Arkansas. And maybe they're not. Maybe they have no chance. Maybe Arkansas is a 17-point favorite and they win by 3 touchdowns. But if you're trying to define what a trap game could be, it's you start 2-0, you're overly confident, and you're looking ahead at your road trip to LSU. And then
See,
all of a sudden,
yeah.
a bunch of grown-ass men with families and wives and children who are 23 years old from BYU show up in Vietnam and they take it to you. That would be a trap game, I feel like, imperfect. If you're trying to look for like the definition of a trap game. I think.
Because that's coming. It can go either way. It can be coming before a big game and you oversee it because you're looking ahead, or it can come after a huge game because you're just trying to get through it and you haven't. And I guess you don't really want to think too far forward. Most coaches try to get teams from saying like, don't
Human
think about
beings.
LSU. We got BYU, but they're seeing the schedule.
They're
week to
human
week.
beings. They are
I mean,
human beings.
I don't know if I would say BYU as much. I think that all three of those they can go into clear-headed and hope to be 3-0, and then LSU is,
Right, but the point is that BYU is clearly the best of those three.
True.
And it's right before LSU. So it's hard to keep a 19 or a 20-year-old from like paying attention when you're a 12-point favorite and you're supposed to win the game at home. It's easy to overlook that team.
Sam Pittman will keep him in line.
Well, maybe. And then there's the other one, which is after the big rivalry game, which is sometimes called the letdown alert. Letdown alert. The only other one I wrote down for Arkansas was Mississippi State because it happens in between road trips to Alabama and Florida. And if they're pretty good at that point, then maybe they overlook Mississippi State. But like, I don't think so. I think Missouri, I think they could be if they have a really great year, they could waltz into that Missouri game feeling overly confident. And maybe Missouri's better than you think, and Missouri gives them a game. I think Missouri could be the one that sneaks up on them. Otherwise, BYU's like the only one I wrote down.
I think if what happens with Missouri, what we think is going to happen with Missouri happens with Missouri, Missouri will start to sneak up, quote unquote, on people less and less throughout the course of the season.
Yes.
I think they will be, if we're looking at Missouri right now, like, could they be sneaky? Yes. But if what happens with that team and Eli Drinkwitz, which you've been preaching about for over and over and over again, and I think you're right that they might not be sneaky at that point. But right now, looking at it, it could be.
No, I think that's right. I have Missouri down as a trap game for a lot of other people.
Yeah, yeah.
It
was hard. I had to stop picking that so I wouldn't be boring.
So let's start with Alabama. Let's go alphabetical here, and we'll start with Alabama because Alabama does have a bunch of trap games, right? Mm-hmm. Alabama, to me, and I don't know if it's like, again, you have to assume things are going right for the other team and poorly for your team in theory if you're an Alabama fan. To me, it's Kentucky on November 11th on the road. You're going to be playing LSU the week before. You've got the Iron Bowl in 2 weeks. I don't know how it can be one of the big games. I don't think Texas is not a trap game. They almost beat them last year. Yeah. Texas A&M on the road is like one of the most important games of the season. I don't think that could be a trap game.
That's the difference between like close and trap.
Yeah, like if everyone has it circled, it can't be a trap game.
Right.
What'd you put for Alabama?
I mean, it's hard. You kind of have to just always assume that Auburn is, we don't know what's going to happen. But on the same front, I also think that it can't, I don't know. Maybe if something crazy happened, like the Hugh Freeze factor with Ole Miss, I don't think it's going to happen, but trying to waltz in as Alabama, you're hoping to like come into your schedule, potentially they'd love to come in 4-5-0, and then the first challenge be Texas A&M. But there's a good chance that some kind of adversity will hit them before that. Do I think Ole Miss is going to win that game? No, but I do think it's really dangerous to look at your schedule and say, oh yeah, we could go 5-0. First test is going to be A&M because it's still the SEC.
So which game are you circling as the biggest trap game for Alabama?
You took it. It's definitely Kentucky. But I'm trying to make a case for something else. Auburn's always there. It's a rivalry. But
it's too big of a game, I think. But maybe to your point, if Auburn is like 6-5, mm-hmm. But like, even then, maybe your players like take a breath and overlook them a little bit. But it's certainly
the last game of the season,
and it's the freaking Iron Bowl. It can't be a trap game,
right? That's the difference.
Maybe Ole Miss at home.
That's what I said.
Maybe Ole Miss at home. I would say Mississippi State on the road.
You acted like you just.
No. You didn't say that. you didn't say that specific
I
word,
said
but
I said the Ole
tracked
Miss
you.
Hugh Freeze thing. If you think you're going to be 3-0 and you look at Ole Miss and you're like,
Yeah,
oh,
but
we're going
he's
to
the
keep
coach at
cruising.
Auburn. I thought you were talking about Auburn.
Well, oh, I see what you're saying.
I thought you were talking about Auburn because you said Auburn.
Okay, that's true. I kind of had to. I stand corrected.
No, it's all right. But so if they were switched, actually, if Ole Miss was on the road the week before A&M, that's where I'd be like, watch out, because you're looking ahead to A&M. You know Jimbo Fisher's a big game. A&M has played Alabama so hard. That's why you can't circle that game.
Right.
So I think Ole Miss at home. The problem is they just dominate Mississippi State. Like Alabama just owns Mississippi State, and I just don't know how. Even on the road, even like they could get real up to beat Lane Kiffin at home, right? Beat Lane Kiffin at home. Then they got to get real up to beat A&M, and in between they struggle against Mississippi State. That makes sense as a trap game, but they just crush Mississippi State like every year of Saban's career. So it's like
I know if there's one before A&M, it's Ole Miss.
I think that's right. And I don't think Kentucky's frankly good enough to beat them, but I'm trying to find like, oh, right after LSU, maybe there's a letdown on the road against what could be a very good Kentucky team.
But that's the definition. You did your job. That's what you were trying to find.
All right, Auburn. Who you got? Auburn. I got one real nice one here for you.
You go first on Auburn.
Auburn at Vanderbilt.
What?
Yep, at Vanderbilt.
I mean, I'll take it.
Because they're going to go to Arkansas and then the New Mexico State and then Alabama. And it's a must-win game, but they could absolutely overlook it because they're going to play A&M, Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. And then you have to look ahead to Arkansas, and in between, a little road trip to Vanderbilt. And Auburn is, in my mind, not good enough yet to overlook anybody. Vanderbilt beat some good teams last year. They are clearly headed in the right direction. At Vanderbilt is my trap game for Auburn. How about that?
This was one of those really hard ones for me because it's like I don't know if there's a better answer than that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the question marks I still have around Auburn. I think you have more confidence in them and what they're going to be able to do right out of the gate than I do. And I'm very prepared to stand corrected on that because I know what the possibility with the new coaching staff could be. But this was the hardest one for me to find an actual like trap game.
Because they're not good enough. They're not good enough to overlook anybody.
They're not good enough to overlook anybody.
Right.
And then there's a huge discrepancy between the teams that they play, like a Samford, and it's like Samford A&M, like Vanderbilt, Alabama, like New Mexico. It's like there's such harsh discrepancy between the different levels of the teams that they're playing that I guess if you had to define one, it'd be Vanderbilt. But I would say I still right now have a question mark next to Auburn. That's why I told you to go first.
I have a question mark next to Florida next. It says none question mark. Again,
no trap games.
They're non-conference. God bless.
Lord have mercy.
Unbelievable. I'm coming off a little bit of a weekend Father's Day bender, and I'm maybe not be 100%.
You had a Father's Day bender?
Well, we're right in the middle of trap games here. I'll explain why I have a weird voice after our interview with Kyle Tucker. How about that?
Okay.
If I can get there. No, like you're at Utah in the non-conference. No, I mean, no chance that there's like you're a 10-point underdog in that game. You're
not overlooking that. It's a
right.
Thursday night, one of the very first games of the season, and it's there's no way that's overlooked.
Again, I wrote Vanderbilt down at home because that's the only time that they might overlook a team. At Kentucky's a big game. At South Carolina's a big game because they beat the tar out of them last year. I mean, Tennessee's a huge game. Georgia's a huge game. Maybe Arkansas at home because you have Georgia. If Arkansas struggles and has a bad year, and you have to play Georgia and LSU, and in between Georgia and LSU,
yep.
you host Arkansas at home. Maybe that's your spot where you get beat at home by a team that you're favored over. Maybe.
That's what I had, just because there is strong competition on the front and the back of that, and it's kind of towards the end of this. Well, no, I mean, I guess you have a few games left after that, but the only other thing, which wouldn't be a traditional trap game, is if it's still not though. Like, I mean, I guess you could, but you're never going to overlook Kentucky as Florida at this point. Maybe a different version of Florida, a different Florida team, but
and
you're not going to
a different Kentucky.
And a different Kentucky, but there's really, I mean, you got Tennessee 2 weeks prior, but that's not enough. You still have Charlotte in between, and then you're going to have time to focus on Kentucky. It's not going to sneak up on you. So if there is one on Florida's schedule, it's Arkansas.
I think that's fair. I think that's probably fair. What about Georgia? Let's move on to Georgia here.
Georgia.
So I actually wrote down 3 different ones, and they all sort of have question marks next to them. But what I want to know, you have to go first this time.
God, I wrote down multiple ones too.
Good.
So part of me wants to say, I would say maybe Auburn as a program.
That's what I wrote down, Auburn.
But there is time for them to address that because their schedule goes, it won't be sneaky. It could be upsetting and maybe a trap, but it's not because they aren't going to have time to see it coming because they've got UT Martin, Ball State, South Carolina. Obviously, they're not going to overlook that after having those first 2. It's not a gimme, but they'll focus on it.
Outside of a road trip to Tennessee, couldn't you argue that every single game is a trap game for Georgia, and the only way they even lose any of them is if the entire team overlooks the game?
Yes.
Like in a weird way?
Yeah, it's when you are where Georgia is right now, the trap is, what does that mean?
It's every night, or your trap is set every day, every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Like Florida's too big of a game for the 2 fan bases and the 2 coaching staffs to for me.
It's off-site after
a trap game.
A bye, off-site after an open spot in the schedule. Like it's not going to be that.
At Tennessee, you cannot call it a trap game if it's the toughest game on your regular season schedule. In theory, you can't call that a trap game.
This is why you cannot use. There are certain teams
upset
that
alert.
You should you should leave certain teams out of your trap journalism because some teams don't have a trap game. Trap.
You're running around town journo trapping people.
You don't have to pick one for every single team, and I think that's where the term gets misused. Is like Georgia doesn't have a trap game. Anything that goes wrong for Georgia is not going to be good.
Here's what I'll throw out there.
What's up?
November 11th, you're going to play Florida 2 weeks earlier. You're going to play Missouri, and then you have to go to Tennessee the following week. Ole Miss at home.
Maybe.
I don't think anyone's going to beat Georgia, okay? I just want to make sure I'm very clear on this.
That was Ole Miss away. I would feel more inclined.
I agree. But if you're trying to find one here, if Ole Miss is good and the quarterback hits and it's Jackson Dart or whoever it is, and all of a sudden the defense is better with Pete Golding, the whole thing could be clicking right then about that time. Now, if that's the case, then they're not going to overlook them. But if Tennessee's really good, in theory, you could catch Georgia players looking ahead to the next week, the road trip to Tennessee, and maybe Ole Miss plays some crazy out of their mind game. Bo Wallace, the ghost of Bo Wallace, comes walking out that door, and they force 5 turnovers inside the 40-yard line, and Ole Miss wins against Georgia. Otherwise, they're all trap games for Georgia, and probably won't happen. So,
agreed.
All right, Kentucky.
God, we've said a couple things in sync today. That's not like us.
Yeah, it's very
I had a pretty clear answer on this.
Oh, then I want you to go.
South Carolina.
Ooh, at South Carolina.
At South Carolina after Bama, and it kind of like sets up like last season's home loss to Mizzou for South Carolina. I mean, this is to me the game that stands out. You got rivalry week the next week. That was my best time I said rivalry week all day, by the way.
Yeah, you said it like 4 times today. Good job.
But not well. Like that was the only time it was fine. It's after Alabama. I mean, as Kentucky, even though we know as like a population, is Kentucky going to be Alabama? Probably not. That's not what a player or coach's mentality is going into the Alabama game. You will always want to, you're going to get everybody's best if you're Alabama. To me, that's South Carolina is the one that sticks out just because of where it falls. It falls in between rivalry week and it's after Alabama.
Yeah, it wasn't as good.
I
had South Carolina written down, but they were my third one. But I do have them written down. And in part, here's a weird angle on all of this. The fact that Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer clearly do not like each other, I feel like is part of like why that maybe isn't a trap game. Like South Carolina went into Lexington last year and beat them.
Because of the animosity there.
And then Shane Beamer talked all kinds of shit about it. and if you win, you get to talk shit. That's how it works.
You're right. It's on the radar for other reasons.
So I wrote down at Vanderbilt in week number 4 because it's before the Florida home game. Florida at home is a huge game for Kentucky. Huge, huge, huge game. And they lost to Vanderbilt last year, and now they're going to Vanderbilt this year. So just want to point that one out. And then the other one is Missouri, because it's after Georgia and before Tennessee.
Now that's a good one that I overlooked that game. That makes sense to me. I will say when it comes to Vanderbilt.
Go ahead.
No,
I was
you
going
can
to say
finish.
the argument on Missouri is just the argument against my case, I guess, on Missouri is that they're always playing in close games.
Right.
So like they won't overlook them, but maybe that's why they always play in close games, because they're overlooking Missouri because they're getting up for Georgia one week. Then they play Missouri. Then they have to get up for Tennessee at home. Tennessee at home is a huge game for Kentucky.
Right.
And
I don't think. No, I'm going to let you finish your rant. I keep interrupting you today.
No. I mean, sometimes I just say conjunctions just to like fill dead space, you know.
Schoolhouse Rock. Because of where it's nestled, yes. In general, does Kentucky overlook Missouri? No, because that game plays closely almost always, at least in recent history.
Yep.
Because of where it's nestled, yes. I will say I do think that sometimes, even with a big game after, so when you're looking at the schedule and you're like, okay, you got Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, and then you have at Vanderbilt and then Florida. I do think that those games when you have 0 losses leading up to it, I think there's always concentration on, can we go 0-2? Or sorry, can we go 2-0? Can we go 3-0? Can we go 4-0? And then can we go into Florida can we beat Florida and go 5-0? So I do think that sometimes the games that are on the front end of the schedule where there haven't been any losses yet don't get overlooked like they would if Vanderbilt was a little bit later, because they're like, let's go 5-0 and get out of Florida with that kind of momentum.
And the other thing
that's why I think Vanderbilt wouldn't get overlooked as much as maybe it normally would.
And that's maybe true. Also, Vanderbilt beat them last year, as I mentioned. So like when you lose the previous year to somebody, like you kind of remember that shit. So like that's why. I mean, I guess
that's a hard one too, but yeah.
But to me, at Vanderbilt right before Florida, Missouri right before Tennessee, and South Carolina after Bama and before Louisville, are all kind of like right in that wheelhouse. LSU, this was interesting. LSU's schedule is sneaky tough, but like laid out well, I feel like. I wrote down at Mississippi State in week 3, which leads into the Arkansas rivalry game. And then I wrote down, of course, at Missouri.
I wrote that down too.
Because if they beat Florida State, which is a top 10 game, a huge game. If they beat Florida State, beat arch rival Arkansas, beat arch rival Ole Miss, and they are riding into Missouri, they're either the most confident team and they're going to be a playoff caliber team and they're going to destroy Missouri, or we find out that they've overlooked Missouri altogether, because then they got Auburn the next week. So Missouri is a lot of people's trap game this year.
Yeah, it is. And I think also Missouri's coming off of what's definitely a projected win against Vanderbilt. And I guess it could sneak up. I do think, again, like we talked about, the further we get into the season, I think the less Missouri will be overlooked unless they have a slow start. If Missouri has a slower start than we think, which again, I guess we're going to look at their schedule next.
Two coming
away.
Up. Yep.
If they get off to a slow start and they just have to get some things in order, like they just got some kinks to figure out. People are like, "Oh, Missouri isn't that good." Like there was too much hype around Missouri. Like they're not as good as we thought. But Eli and his guys are just kind of trying to tweak some things, and then because sometimes it doesn't take a ton of tweaks for everything to change. Like you got some situations going on the line or whatever, and you make a few changes, and all of a sudden, like you jump up to a different level that more than people think that you can. So maybe if they have a slow start, but I think at that point in the season, it's going to be not very smart to overlook Missouri.
If Missouri loses to Kansas State and they're 4-1, that would be very easy to overlook if you're LSU, because that means they're probably not ranked. It means you're probably a heavy favorite on the road. But we'll get to Missouri in a second here. One more for LSU I want to throw out at you. They play the Florida Gators
I was going to say Florida right after Alabama. Yep.
So my question for you, because it's at home, my question for you is the rivalry too big between Florida and LSU for it to be an overlook? Or because they're coming off what is a monstrous battle for the SEC West against Alabama, that all of a sudden they're at home, they've been sleeping in their own beds in Baton Rouge, and they take Florida for granted? I absolutely think that could be a trap game for LSU.
I don't think that there's ever going to be a lack of energy and emphasis on playing Florida for LSU, but I do think that if the LSU Alabama game is close the week prior, on an individual player level, there can be
A letdown?
no, I think guys in close games on an individual player level take risks. Like if they're close to beating Alabama, I think guys individually could put themselves in like jeopardizing physical situations
Oh, okay.
to try to make the difference in that game of like
Interesting.
you lowered your head to make that hit and you shouldn't have.
You're trying to make a
Or
statement after the loss.
yeah, or you're
Okay,
trying
okay.
to solidify the win because you're like, holy shit, we might beat Bama. Let's do anything we can to make it
Okay.
happen.
Okay.
Not saying that that's outrageous for LSU because I think that they have the talent to do that, but I think we don't really talk about that much. We talk about it as a team, but guys on an individual player level are, can make riskier moves and do stupid things in the moment from adrenaline
Yep,
or
that's
whatever.
true. That's
And
true.
then you might put yourself in a bad physical state for Florida, which I guess could potentially make it a little bit trappier
Yep. Yep.
than usual.
All right, Mississippi State. I'm gonna go. Because again, when you are Mississippi State and I'm picking you seventh, you can't really overlook anybody. I think the team they're gonna potentially overlook is Arizona in the non-conference in week 2. Jaden DeLara is a really good quarterback. Arizona is trending in the right direction. They went out there and handled Mississippi State did handle their business last year with relative ease. That Arizona team is better this year. And if they haven't figured out the new coaching staff and the new offense and the new personnel pieces and every play, like that is a dangerous spot to overlook a non-conference opponent, even if you know them pretty well. And I still think they're going to win Mississippi State, but there's not many games on the schedule. Like maybe, is Kentucky and Auburn? Like I don't.
It's South Carolina nestled in between LSU and Bama to me.
But like again, you're supposed to lose to LSU and Bama.
I know.
You kind of have to be up for South Carolina and know that that's like your only good chance to win in that stretch. That's hard.
But that's not really how they think, though.
No, I know. You're right. I know.
They just want it. They're like, what if we can upset this? What if we can pull this off? I think our thinking is we're more logical than coaches and players are when they're like, what if we can pull this off? And
yeah, that makes sense. You're right. We're not thinking about it that way. All right,
we're thinking about like what makes sense. And
like you're gonna lose.
Like, what will how effing sweet would that be if ESPN like on Monday was talking about us knocking off LSU? You know,
right? And then you overlook South Carolina. No, right. That's absolutely correct. You beat LSU at home, all of a sudden you definitely overlook South Carolina. That is absolutely what happens.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
You're right. That it depends on what happens with LSU.
That's a perfect way to put it. Because if you lose, like we think of it and we go, oh, that's a loss to LSU and a loss to Bama, so they better get up for South Carolina.
They're not thinking like
that's
that.
That's not how they're thinking.
No.
All right, Mizzou. At Vanderbilt is tricky. I'm going to put Vanderbilt on here for a lot of teams, especially in the middle tier, because Vanderbilt's going to get somebody just like they did last year. So you better be up for them. The South Carolina game on October 21st is interesting because it's in between the Kentucky and Georgia games. That's at home. You better be up for that one. But I'm going to go off the board here with Missouri, really.
Because they're going to say Memphis?
I'm going to say Memphis.
That's what I said too.
They are going to lose to Kansas State, in my opinion, at home in week 3. And then they know they've got like all SEC games the rest of the way. You got to be if they don't refocus quickly on Memphis. Now, if they lose to Kansas State, then you probably don't overlook Memphis. If you beat Kansas State, then you might overlook Memphis. So maybe that's more appropriate.
I think that's what it. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. If you beat Kansas State, you're like, okay, well, or sorry, did you say lose? You just said lose to Kansas State.
If you lose to Kansas State, then you probably don't overlook Memphis.
No.
If you beat Kansas State, which I think will be an upset at home,
you're like, 3-0. We got Memphis next week, 4-0. Then we got Vandy. We should win that one 5-0, and then we can start concentrating on LSU.
Bingo.
And then all of a sudden, your schedule goes from what should be 4-0 to 2-2.
Bingo.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I put Memphis too.
Ole Miss. I think you can make the case for Arkansas, which is at home between LSU and Auburn. I think you can make the case for Vanderbilt, which is always a crazy bonkers ass game between Auburn and A&M. But the one is it's clearly Tulane. I just don't know if Tulane's the highest rated Group of 5 team. You're on the road. It's week 2. I think it's almost too high profile in a weird
I think
way.
it's too high profile. I think you need to be 3-0 going into Bama, and I don't think anything gets overlooked because of the order of that schedule.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
And then, but I put Vanderbilt. I mean, I see what you're saying about
totally
Tulane because I don't think that's like talent or ability wise completely out of the question. But I don't think anyone goes. I think you need to be 3-0 going into Alabama if you're Ole Miss. And then Vanderbilt, I've seen it in person on TV my whole life. Doesn't matter how good or bad, they always play to each other's level, and then something crazy often happens. So I put them.
It's funny. I wrote down Tulane like definitively at first, and then I was like, you know what? Tulane might be ranked ahead of Ole Miss.
It is if it wasn't in that order, I would say that's true. Like if it,
I mean,
it
like
could be
in
Tulane.
like in the top 25 rankings, like Tulane could be like number 21 and
Oh,
Ole Miss could be 24. Like they might not. Ole Miss, like Tulane could be ranked higher and they're at home. So like, how can that be a trap game if you're playing against the team on the road that's ranked ahead of you? Like I don't. That's not
habit. We're just not used to that.
Not really a trap game. Tulane's very good. South Carolina, what you got?
South Carolina. Let's see. What did I put? I feel like I had trouble with this one too because they are.
I put Mississippi State down. Which is week 3
because they're in between Georgia and Tennessee.
It's week 4 after Georgia, heading into Tennessee. You're at home. If you're probably coming off a loss to Georgia, but you still know that Tennessee's the bigger game. Maybe you lose to Mississippi State, and then I've got Kentucky on there as well, which is later in the year. Second to last game of the season. It's your last SEC game. You got Clemson the following week. You've kind of put it on there for Kentucky. I think you could put it on there for South Carolina as well. I don't think there's really a trap game. I feel like the South Carolina team goes into every single. I mean, I think if for some reason you got a little too cocky at the beginning of the season, but I think as soon as you get through potentially a loss to Georgia because they're playing at Georgia, brings you back down to earth real fast.
Yeah, and I just don't see. I guess not only because the way the program is run and the hype and the focus week to week.
Yep.
I just don't see this team overlooking anybody. I think they are scrappy. They know that they have to be at their very best, like not turning the ball over, executing fully in order to like win some of these middle tier games. I just don't think I don't see South Carolina being subject to a trap. I'm not saying they're not going to lose. They're definitely going to lose games, but I don't think they're going to overlook any.
No, that's fair. It's just a credit to the coaching staff. Did they overlook Florida last year? Probably. They probably did. Florida beat them to death there. All right, Tennessee. I would say so. I've got the Florida game written down with a question mark, but like
I do too.
It's too big of a game, and they've like won in Gainesville like one time in 25 years. So I think that one is circled and like highlighted and underlined. So I don't think you can overlook Florida. At Kentucky, I think they absolutely will overlook Kentucky. You're gonna play Bama on the road, then you got to play Kentucky. I think you could also circle the Missouri game as well. I think there's more than a few overlooked games for Tennessee. I think there's some trap games all up and down their schedule this year.
So Missouri is nestled between UConn and Georgia. So maybe you're looking ahead to Georgia, but at that point,
Bingo.
So God, that one's hard too. I mean, I think if the beginning of the season goes really well for Tennessee and you can, and you go Virginia. I'm not saying Virginia's a gimme at all, but like if you beat Virginia, you beat Austin
They're a 27-point favorite over Virginia.
Okay, so Virginia, Austin Peay, Florida.
You know what? The one it could be is UTSA.
See, I'm going to be honest. I don't know enough about that program to say
UTSA is a top 35 team in America. If they are 4-0 and they beat Florida and they come off that win to Florida, they're going to come back home knowing that the revenge game is next against South Carolina. Because you cannot put the South Carolina game as a trap game. They have that.
I know because I would if what happened last year hadn't happened. I would say that was it because they're like, oh, sick, we're 5-0, we're going to go to A&M. We're going to play A&M.
You go to Florida September 16th and you win the game in Florida for the first time in like 30 years, and you come back and South Carolina's next. You will overlook UTSA, and that is Frank Harris is a really good quarterback. Jeff Traylor's a really good coach. That is a top 35 group of 5. Like they are They are
That's the move. I think you answered your own question.
I think,
because
yeah.
if
Way to go,
it
Braden.
it would be South Carolina if there wasn't the history that what just happened. And I would say they're going to think they're going 5-0 and go to A&M. But you're right. Because of what happened last year, I think UTSA is a good move. I just didn't know enough about that program to be able to say that. But if you're saying they're top 35,
no, and that's true. And I have said all season that they're going to lose to A&M, so it's hard for me to call it a trap game, but A&M is absolutely a trap game. Bama on the road, Kentucky on the road, the 2 games after that. I am absolutely calling the A&M loss for Tennessee. So I guess that's technically a trap game as well. Texas A&M, we got to move along here. Texas A&M, I have Auburn written down at home September 23rd. It's Hugh Freeze's first SEC game in return. It's Bobby Petrino's first SEC game in return. So maybe there's too much hype around it, but they've got Arkansas and Bama and Tennessee the 3 weeks following. Nothing on this schedule is really trappish. I don't know. South Carolina maybe at home after the Tennessee game. I don't know. Like if you go on the road and you beat Tennessee and you're A&M, you come home and you host South Carolina, you're probably a heavy favorite. You could absolutely overlook South Carolina. So that South Carolina game at home is dangerous. I think the Auburn game at home is dangerous, and maybe the Mississippi State game, but I don't know.
I think there's a lot of dangerous games, but again, just because of the way this schedule falls, like you could say if there wasn't a history between Arkansas and Texas A&M, and Texas A&M really lived up to their full potential, and they had a really good first 4 games, but also you still have Miami in there, so like let's not get ahead of ourselves. But
right.
You go New Mexico, Miami, ULM, and then you beat off Auburn. If you didn't have a
heated Auburn?
Oh shit.
Oh, we're absolutely leaving that in.
That's fine. I don't really care. You victoriously defeat Auburn. That wasn't great. If you're 4-0, honestly at this point, what am I have nothing to lose. But if you don't have the history with Arkansas that you have, that game, if it was in Arkansas, could be it. If they don't have the history that Texas A&M and Arkansas have before you play Bama, but you're not overlooking Arkansas because it's Arkansas.
Arkansas is huge. Arkansas is huge game. That's
right.
That's a rivalry. Yeah.
For some people that aren't A&M, I don't know.
Arkansas would be a perfect trap game before Bama if it wasn't A&M.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
You said that much more succinctly than I did.
Well, you're just trying to beat off people. It's fine. At Tennessee, if they beat the Volunteers, if A&M beats the Volunteers, that's where South Carolina becomes a huge letdown trap game.
Agreed.
Because they could be flying high coming back from Knoxville. All of a sudden, they're playing a team that they don't think is all that great. They're probably a heavy favorite, and South Carolina beats them. Vanderbilt, I actually have UNLV Week 4 as a trap game because Vanderbilt cannot overlook anybody. But UNLV on the road in Vegas against former SEC head coach Barry Odom, who's now the head coach at UNLV, that's a tricky one, man. And so they can't overlook UNLV. So that's my only trap game. Yeah, there's none.
There's no trap game for Vanderbilt. I literally wrote no trap game.
Yeah.
If
all the kids are in Vegas partying.
Momentum really matters when there aren't trap games. So like if Vanderbilt loses game 1, 2, 3, all 3, there's no trap games the rest of the season. If you win the first 3 and then you have UNLV and you get Kentucky after that and you're thinking about being 5-0, like that mentality of momentum goes further than people think it does. But there's no trap game for Vanderbilt. Anything is a gift from God. Just like
there you have it. There you have it. Those are our trap games in 2023.
That was long-winded of us today.
Hey, it's a good episode, man. And it gets better because here was our conversation, our Kentucky State of the Union. We talked about not just football, but also Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director, John Calipari, the future of the program, all kinds of stuff, including the offensive line, the new offense, and the new coordinator. We did all of that with the Athletics' Kyle Tucker. Kyle, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Great, man. How are you?
I'm always doing wonderful. We are still a couple of weeks away from talking season, so I have some time to sleep, which is great. I wanted to start with just the general sense of the football program from 10,000 feet. They win 10 games. A lot of changes happen on the offense. Will Levis comes back. They don't win 10 games, but they bring back the coordinator. Just in general, your perspective of where this football program is now, really deep into Mark Stoops' tenure.
Yeah, I mean, I think 10 years into this thing, he has built something where you've won 10 games 2 times in 3 years, after the 2022 season, which they'd only done once, or they hadn't done in 40 years, I should say. They'd only done once in their history, and they hadn't done it in 40 years. And they've done it, you do it twice in 3 years. And then people are kind of grumbling last year when they can't back it up. And there were a lot of reasons for that. There were a lot of high hopes when a guy like Will Levis comes back, obviously. But the offensive line, for the first time in a long time, Stoops really built that thing through the trenches. Offensive and defensive line in his tenure have been better, upper tier SEC level, better than anyone ever thought you could do at Kentucky. And they finally took a dip there last year. And that was brutal for them because, your best piece is this guy who, Will Levis, first round pick. Well, almost first pick of the second round, as it turned out. And you can't protect him, and he gets beat up, and I think he gets a little trigger, shy, and a lot of things happen there. Also you lose Liam Cohen, who was the offensive coordinator that brought him in, the guy who he's really comfortable with. And you try, Stoops tried really hard for continuity, going and get Scangarello from the 49ers, at least in that same tree of coaches.
Right.
But it was different. It was clear that Scangarello wasn't nearly the play caller that Cohen was. And it just, between that and the offensive line, it all kind of fell apart. But I would say what's really impressive about Stoops, one, the longevity, to continue winning at Kentucky and stay there. Two is his adaptability. I think he has, when the offense was really struggling in the passing game, that was kind of the storyline forever. Like, they can't get a quarterback, they can't throw the ball. And then they bring in Levis and Cohen, and that changes because he knew that had to happen. He'd hit a little bit of a dip. And then last season happened, and he didn't stand pat. 1 year in, he gone. The offensive coordinator's gone. He brings Cohen back, which was a pretty huge move from the NFL. And then, basically every area that they needed to add, they went and added. They really, they've basically done what John Calipari and the basketball team have completely failed to do. They attacked the transfer portal and got better. I mean, immediately. You go get the best available quarterback, Devin Leary from NC State. You get one of the 3 or 4 best available running backs, the kid from Vanderbilt, 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC. You load up on offensive linemen, quality offensive linemen, kids from Alabama and, West Virginia and Ohio State, like big time, high school recruits who were at big time programs. And you address those needs. You go get a starting tackle who started 30 some games in Northern Illinois. Like, basically you say, these were our needs. Check, 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 check. Yep. Get a better coordinator, get a better line, replace Will Levis, get him some weapons. And all those things have happened. And so we're in this place now where Kentucky football, again, their fan base goes into a season with, beyond any reasonable belief in the past expectations.
I want to get to some of the details of the roster. I mean, you've already addressed a lot of them there. I think the offensive line, is it better with all the returning talent and then all the influx? I think we're only going to know when we know, when it happens. But I'm curious, strategically about a program like Kentucky and how it uses the portal. It feels like Mark Stoops has sort of carved out this kind of middle space. It's not Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, wholesale changes every year, 25, 30 guys. It's not Kirby Smart grabbing a single guy. It's sort of this middle ground. We're going to have our culture. We're going to have our identity and develop guys, but we're going to go out and find a couple of pieces every now and then to fill some holes. Do you feel like that's the right place for Kentucky, a program like Kentucky, is to be in that middle ground, or do they need to take bigger swings or fewer swings? I know he's an Iowa. I know he's an Iowa guy, and that's sort of where he's at. But is that the right place?
I'm not sure they could really take bigger swings. I mean, they kind of are where they are in the pecking order of acquiring talent, but they've recruited high school talent better than ever. That from day one under Mark Stoops, and they've maintained that. They're getting the high 4-star kids at a rate that they've never really gotten them before. And I think ideally he'd like to mostly recruit and develop. I think most coaches would, even now. But there are some positions where the nice thing for college basketball now is, in the past, if you whiffed on a couple of offensive line classes and you had this stinker of an offensive line like last year, what are you going to do? I mean, you're just going to have to take 2 or 3 years and rebuild it. There is no free agency. Well, now there is. Now, if okay, we feel pretty good about developing 3 of the 5 spots, but these other ones we just don't know. You can go get 2 quality players, maybe game changers, but at minimum, you're not going to get your quarterback killed again kind of players, which they've done. And then 2, I think Stoops has also realized what I think a lot of people have realized, and that is, when you're Kentucky, getting a game-changing quarterback out of high school, you may not do that. Like you may not sign the 5-star kid and ever see him, play to fruition. But because, these powerhouse programs are recruiting, 3 or 4 of them at a time, and then, the transfer portal happens and some guy doesn't want to sit on the bench, you can go get a quality player. That the transfer portal is a great option to get a good to very good quarterback. And that, I think this is now basically every quarterback they've had under Stoops that's been any good was a transfer. Even before the, wide open transfer portal, they did it sort of the traditional way. And, these last 2, I think Levis and Leary are, big swings. Those were the first priority in each of those sort of off seasons, like to go get the quarterback and then figure everything else out. And, 2, when you go get that quarterback, it becomes a little easier to recruit the other pieces. I think, the running back wants to play with the quarterback, and the offensive line want to come play with a game-changing QB.
It's weird. Like I don't have a lot of questions about the offense outside of the offensive line, because I think Stoops has this really nice blend of like recruit and develop, and then like be selective with who I go get in the portal, but at the important position. Like the receiving core, I have no questions about. You already mentioned Ray Davis. I think Devin Leary's great. I think Liam Cohen's great. On the defense, they've recruited so well, and it's Mark Stoops' baby. Where are the question marks? Is it corner? I feel like they're pretty good up the middle. How good can this defense be relative to Mark Stoops' defenses in the past?
I think it could be really good. Corner, I think is always a question mark, or has been recently for them, just because they kind of struck out on some guys, and they've added through transfer portal and things like that. But they've also gone out here in the last couple classes and added some high level recruits. I think they feel pretty good about what they have. The defensive line and linebacker is an area where they've recruited really, really well, where they've gone. Like Trevin Wallace was a top 100 kid out of Georgia who they signed and is now going to be a junior. JJ Weaver was in their backyard, a 4-star kid, and Keaton, the Wade twins were from right here where we are in Nashville, in the talent raid a couple years ago that they made on Nashville. They signed the Wade twins, who are, 2 big, strong, 6'4", 240-pound athletes. They got Barryon Brown at wide receiver out of Nashville. And so they've done a really good job in that front 7 of stockpiling talent and letting it age. They've got now juniors, redshirt sophomores and juniors and seniors who were 4- and 5-star, caliber guys. And I think they expect all those guys to be, big time. The back end, I guess, is probably the question mark, but I never feel terribly worried about their secondary with Stoops, because that's such a specialty for him. He is the sort of the defensive back guru on that staff. And then with the defensive coordinator, Brad White, to me, he's a head coach. He's a future head, both their coordinators to me. And that's, I'm kind of all over the place here, but when we're talking about big picture with Stoops, one of the most impressive things he's done is hiring staff. And he currently has 2 coordinators, Liam Cohen and Brad White, that I think are both future head coaches. And they are, they're great in front of a camera. They are clearly really good teachers. Brad White has developed so many guys. When you think about what he did with Josh Allen, and then, Pascal and all the guys that came through there and turned into pros. Josh Allen was a 2-star recruit who ended up being a top 10 pick. And he just continually develops those guys. So you have to, I think you just kind of almost got to a point, which again, a little crazy with Kentucky football, where you just expect a certain level of competence defensively, because that guy's in charge.
Even the guys he's fired have gone on to have pretty good jobs out there.
And he's not he's not afraid to fire somebody.
Right.
He makes changes, and then he's also kept good people. That's also impressive.
Is 8-4 are okay with people this year? That's a step forward. Are they better than South Carolina and Tennessee? I honestly don't know, to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, right? I mean, I think 8-4 would be a fine season for them. I would guess that most of the fans would tell you that like 9-3 or better is like their definition of success. And that's another, there without a doubt the bar has been raised. I mean, I covered this program when Joker Phillips was, his last 2 years, and when the day he was fired, and they're 2-11 and there's 18,000 people at the Vanderbilt game in a 70,000 seat stadium. I mean, everybody you talked to said, just get me a coach who'll win 7 games and go to a bowl game every year, and I'll be happy for the rest of my life. That is not true anymore. It's not, now that happens and people are like, what are we paying this guy for? They have been to seven consecutive bowl games. They've won 4 of those bowl games. I think they won 3 or 4 in a row. It's like won 10 games twice, won New Year's Day bowl games against Big Ten opponents twice. You beat Penn State in a major bowl game. You beat Iowa in a major bowl game. And people are, but if they go 7-6, people are, what are we paying this guy for? Right. And so I think that even that in and of itself, I think tells you what he's built, that he has significantly raised the bar on what's acceptable.
All right, go with me on a journey here for a second. So we've got all the new scheduling coming up. We know Kentucky's sort of spearheading the 8-game conference movement to some degree. We know what the potential permanent rivals could be, which I'm assuming Kentucky fans don't love the idea of, Georgia, South Carolina, and Mississippi State. No Florida, no Tennessee in that group. You've got this, this kind of a much to do about nothing conflict between Stoops and Calipari in the offseason. But you do have sort of Mitch Barnhart and Kentucky slow on the uptick with NIL. Great work on the facilities and the stadium and the job they've done there. Now they're going to sell beer. All right. Now we're selling beer, which is a great first big step. Where are the fans on sort of Mitch Barnhart and like the structure of the athletic department as a whole? Like, what are people excited about the general trajectory? Do they trust him to handle all of that? Are there questions? Like, give us a sense of where that's all at.
It's hard to say because Twitter is not real life, and I interact with so many people on Twitter. But
me too.
I think there is there's definitely a faction of people that are just kind of over Barnhart because they think he's like too old school, and you're going to have that. I think in any situation where somebody's like really, very level-headed and even keeled, and let's dip our toes in here and let's slowly approach, let's figure this out. And there's an inordinate amount of wisdom in that approach, generally speaking. However, college sports are they're evolving, not just moving, but evolving at like warp speed. There's something changing every day. And, I can certainly see both sides of this situation where from Barnhart's perspective, it's let's move slowly and let's have integrity and let's not push the boundaries, because who knows what the NCAA will eventually say is okay. But people that are frustrated would say they haven't done anything to anybody about any of this. And they've essentially declared this the Wild West. So why don't we have our 6 shooters? It's like, why are we just galloping our horse when like Alabama's riding in with 2 shotguns? If this is the Wild West, why haven't we drawn our pistol type of thing? And I get that too. I mean, because so many schools have just said, okay, well, if the NCAA is going to be, if they're going to be slow to move, and if they're going to sort of keep kicking the can down the road and so, we need federal help, which is an absurd thing to do. Then we're just gonna play fast and loose. We're gonna throw up this collective, and we're gonna pump millions of dollars into it. And we're basically gonna do pay for play, because everybody can act like it's not what it is, but it is what it is. And so I think that there's a large amount of the fan base that are in that camp of like, okay, understand what you're saying, but we're getting left behind. And, but then I think there are people, I would say probably that skew a little older, that are a little, that they're a little more in Mitch Barnhart's own demographic, who would say like, I'm glad we're trying to do it the right way. I appreciate him for all the things that he has built. Like if you if you drive that campus, if you drive that alumni drive now in Lexington, I moved there in 2011 and it was nothing to see. I was so depressed the day that I drove in. I took that job and drove into Lexington and pulled up to the football stadium. I was like, because I had covered Virginia Tech for a long time and they had done all these beautiful, it's a beautiful campus in a beautiful setting. And Commonwealth Stadium, now Kroger Field, was an absolute dump. And all their facilities, their football practice facility was gross and old and like it was just depressing. It looked like a as the kids say, poverty program, right? And now you drive that alumni drive and there's a beautiful new soccer complex and there's a beautiful new baseball stadium and they just came a couple wins away from going to the College World Series and the softball stadium and they've been to a World Series and the football stadium is now up to par and a $50 million new practice facility, and then Stoops just strong-armed them into redoing the indoor facility. So like everything that a real SEC contender has, they have now. They pay their coaches like real SEC contenders now. Their coordinators are, multimillionaires. There are people that really appreciate that he's done all of those things. But now it's like, okay, either you're with us for the evolution or we thank you and we build you we name something after you and you hand it off to somebody that's ready to get their hands dirty in whatever. And I don't even mean like dirty, like
right. I know what you mean.
I just mean there's going to be a lot of things that you have to dig into and figure out. I mean, that I think we've seen athletic directors and coaches get driven out of the business recently because they don't want to deal with it. And I think we might be at that crossroads with Mitch Barnhart. Does he want to deal with it or not? If not, maybe it is time to get a new visionary.
Man, there sure is a lot of positive on the ledger, though. That's for sure. All right, well then, where does John Calipari fit into that process? If we're at a crossroads with Mitch Barnhart and we're at a crossroads with what are we going to be as a program, Kentucky basketball with the talent that they have had for the last 15 years, one national championship probably isn't good enough. So where are we on? How does he factor into all of this?
He's at a crossroads. I would say he and Barnhart are at a crossroads with each other. I would describe their relationship over the last couple of years as sort of a Cold War where they just don't really interact. And I think that's unhealthy that the athletic director and the men's basketball coach at Kentucky, your flagship program, don't really have a great relationship, if one at all. And they'll say, oh, it's fine. And, whatever, but it's not, it's not warm and fuzzy. They don't talk all the time. I don't think they're necessarily on the same page. And Cal enters, he's kind of got them by the scruff of the neck, we'll say. With this contract that he signed in 2019, where, it was 10 years, $86 million, basically fully guaranteed. I think they owe him 75% of the remainder of the contract at any point if he's terminated. Would have been 40 some million if they tried to fire him after this past year. It'll be down to about 31 million next year. What are they going to, if they don't make the tournament or they don't get to the second weekend again at Kentucky, going 4 years, 4 tournaments without making the second weekend at the University of Kentucky is beyond unacceptable.
Yeah.
Especially when you're bringing in the number 1 recruiting class. You've now what seems like made an active choice to just go young. They're going to have at least 7, maybe 8 freshmen, 2 sophomores. At the moment, no juniors or seniors. In an era where everybody in college basketball is old, they're all seniors and 6-year seniors. They didn't sign anybody to this point in the transfer portal, and they're going to lean into this number 1 recruiting class of freshmen like it's 2012 all over again. And if that blows up in his face and they fail, I mean, it will be a bona fide crossroads at that point. I mean, it will be, I think, a real question that Mitch Barnhart will have to answer. Like, is it worth finding $30 million to make this guy go away?
Man,
and I don't know how you don't if they don't win big this year.
That's wild. That is a wild thing to think about, considering all the success he has had. But I'd be lying to you if I said I was shocked that we are here in this situation with John Calipari. All right. Hey, Kyle, thank you so much, man. We appreciate your time. Always love talking with you. Thanks so much for joining us. Pay for good journalism, of course. Go support all the great folks over there at The Athletic. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
That was Kyle Tucker of The Athletic. We only have one more team left in our State of the Union series. That will be the Vanderbilt Commodores, of course, coming up next week on the show. We do appreciate Kyle for joining us.
We do indeed.
Yes, we do.
I thought you were going to say something after that.
No, I'm just resting my voice because of all the partying this weekend. So,
can you tell me about your partying in 30 seconds before I have to get on a call for a meeting?
I saw Hani Mukhtar score a hat trick. I went go-kart.
I was there.
I went go-kart racing, but my wife kicked me out of the house basically and said, "You and your buddy go stay at this Airbnb and just blow off some steam. You don't have to wake up with the kids on Sunday morning." I said, "Okay." So I did a lot of yelling, and we had some construction at the house and the allergies, and like now I'm sick, and so I'm paying for it on the back end. But it was quite a fun night at Geodis Park here in downtown
I was
Nashville.
there.
So
I was there.
Thanks for reaching out. Do appreciate it.
Then Mukhtar just casually got in the elevator at my apartment building after and was just going up to his.
He lives in your apartment building? Hani Mukhtar does?
He does.
That's incredible. That's awesome. That's amazing. My daughters love Hani Mukhtar. They, in fact, don't even separate the names. It's just one name, Hani Mukhtar. So other than that, go Nashville SC. No, they love the boys in gold. Go Nashville SC. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We do appreciate Kyle Tucker as well. For Aaron Dugan, I am Braden Gall. Thank you for listening. This has been Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network.
Later.